Tonight, an update on the Zika virus spreading across the Americas. The latest economic growth is less than stellar, and the latest on the state of the 2016 election. This is Talking Points. Welcome to Talking Points for Thursday, February 4th. I'm Alex Amico. The Zika virus has recently re-emerged in South America and has spread to the United States. Here with more is Talking Points correspondent Elijah Sharma.
The World Health Organization has recently declared the Zika virus a public emergency, as cases have exploded throughout South America and more recently Texas. The virus, first identified in monkeys in Uganda in 1947, first spread to humans in Nigeria in 1954, with periodic outbreaks in Southeast Asia and the Pacific Islands. None of these previous outbreaks were considered a major threat to public health until May of 2015 in Brazil, where it spread rapidly. The virus's symptoms include fever, rash, joint pain, and conjunctivitis, which means red eyes. Only about 1 in 5 infected persons are expected to develop symptoms, and deaths are very rare. However, scientists are highly concerned with the possible link between the virus and the development of microcephaly in infants. Microcephaly is a condition in which infants are born with a below-average head size that can lead to developmental delays and even death. In response, many South American governments have asked couples to avoid getting pregnant. The U.S. government has also asked expecting couples to postpone any travel plans to the region. The primary methods of transmission for the virus are the Aedes mosquito, which lives in South America, and sexual transmission from one infected person. There is currently no vaccine for the Zika virus, but the trial of genetically modified sterile mosquitoes is being bred to reduce population size. As of right now, though, insecticide has been the go-to for governments hoping to control this outbreak.
Now, Elijah, the Olympics are scheduled to take place in Brazil this summer, in Rio de Janeiro. How is the resurgence of the Zika virus affecting preparation right now?
Well, this is a really big moment for the Brazilian government. They don't want this to loom over the games, so they're taking every precaution that they can to try and avoid having cases spring up around the Olympics. They're draining any lakes near possible Olympic sites, and they're really going heavy on the insecticide.
Now, you mentioned in your report that some South American governments have been urging people to avoid getting pregnant to stop the spread of the disease. How effective of a strategy is that to combat this?
Well, this strategy really largely isn't very effective, mostly because it's in South America. South American governments really don't make birth control very available to their population, and this makes it very hard for people to avoid getting pregnant when it's very hard to find any means to stop that. In addition to that, they have a much higher sexual assault rate, and religion is a very big deal in South America, which makes getting birth control, again, much harder than it would be in the U.S.
Elijah Sharma, thank you so much. Coming up after the break, is the Flint water crisis a government scandal? Stay with us. Talking Points will be right back.
So, I just moved in with this family, and it's embarrassing. The little one, he likes to go outside and crawl around in the giant litter box. I don't know what he's doing. I mean, I was born and I knew how to use the litter box. Look at that. That's disgusting. Oh, poop already. You're making me nervous. Oh, okay, I can't look at this anymore. I really hope he grows out of this, for his sake.
Wow, these are really good.
You act surprised. Practice makes perfect.
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. There are thousands of teens in foster care who don't need perfection. They need you.
Two weeks ago, Michigan Governor Rick Snyder issued an apology for the state's failure to protect people from polluted, poisonous water. The crisis in Flint began in 2014, but didn't reach national attention until January of this year. Talking Points correspondent Shruti Marate now joins us to provide a timeline of the issue.
Over the past couple of years, Flint has been under tremendous financial and health insecurity. Back in 2011, Michigan Governor Rick Snyder appointed an emergency financial manager for Flint to fix the city's economic issues. In April of 2014, emergency manager decided to switch from using Detroit's water system to obtaining water from the Flint River. The change was a cost-saving measure to help the struggling city, but was met with almost immediate concerns. Residents raised complaints about the color, taste, and odor of the water. The Flint city government published a news release claiming the water was safe to drink in response to the concerns. 3 months later, E. coli and chloroform bacteria were found in the water. To cover for this, the city issued advisories for residents to boil tap water before using it. Weeks later, Stephen Bush, the district supervisor for the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality, announced, "The city has taken operational steps to limit the potential for a boil water advisory to reoccur." That same month, General Motors stopped using Flint River water because it was corroding their car parts. During the crisis, Flint City Council attempted to pass legislation to go back to Detroit's main water system. However, the receivership structure left the emergency financial manager with little political power, thus making their efforts fruitless. Throughout 2015, many tests revealed high levels of drinking water, a component that is lethal to brain development of children. An email released from Snyder's chief of staff expressed concerns about the issue of lead, but the government still refrained from taking any actions. In September, an outside expert on water quality reported corrosiveness of water is causing lead to leach into the water supply. The State Department of Environmental Quality disputed those conclusions. A group of doctors urged the city to stop sourcing from the Flint River after finding issues of lead in the blood of children. State regulators insisted that the water was safe. It wasn't until December 14, 2015, that Flint declared an official emergency with the state of drinking water, over a year and a half after the initial complaints.
Now, as you just mentioned, this has been going on for about a year and a half, longer even. How did this go on so long without an emergency declaration or any aid of any sort?
Well, there has been some speculations over, for instance, Emily Bazelon, a writer for the New York Times Magazine, made the point that perhaps if Flint wasn't such a majority black, majority poor city, that they could have had some political power to actually make change and the government would have responded more. Of course, this is just speculation and there's absolutely no way to test that, but some people have brought up that theory.
Right, as you mentioned, Flint does have about 40% of their citizens living below the poverty line. Now, over the course of this crisis, when residents started complaining about the water from the Flint River, why couldn't they have just changed the water supply back to the original use from the Detroit water supply?
So the city council did actually try and pass some initiatives to change back to the main water system, but since the government was under receivership at the time, it was really difficult for them to pass any action. For instance, if they wanted to pass something, they had to answer to the city manager, who answered to the treasurer, who answered to the governor, and that bureaucracy made it very difficult to switch back to the main water system.
You mentioned the bureaucracy. Flint does have a pretty interesting government structure. It seems like an unelected emergency manager was in charge of a lot of the jurisdiction that led to this crisis. How does the structure of that government affect essentially the city and how this crisis has been responded to?
So it did affect it in a beneficial way in that that financial manager did try and take as many cost-cutting measures as possible because the city was under a lot of economic turmoil. But at the end of the day, it was a public health hazard. There's so many people that need to now be tested for lead in their blood. It was so detrimental to the health of children. So at the end of the day, this receivership structure really wasn't beneficial to the citizens of Flint.
Shruti Marate, thank you for joining us. President Obama and Bernie Sanders have both brought criminal justice reform to America's forefront in recent months, mainly focusing on the overpopulation in our prisons. That may not be the only flaw our justice system has, though. Criminal trials are taking longer than ever, quite often taking years for a jury to decide. Josh Feinblatt is here to discuss why they're taking such a long time. Josh, thanks for coming on the show.
How are you doing, Alex?
So, Josh, it seems like this has been going on for quite a while. Why is it becoming news right now?
Well, a recent New York Times article brought this sort of to the forefront. It was about a child who was stabbed with scissors in the head, and that case took 40 court appearances and 4 years to resolve. And the mother couldn't file any civil case to pay for those medical expenses, which were upwards of $1,000 per day. She couldn't file those, so it was really a big issue, especially for low-income families.
Now, it seems like most trials, it just seems like most trials do take a long time for them to be decided. It seems like it's all relative. What is considered to be a long trial right now?
Well, I mean, a trial can take a couple weeks, couple months, everything like that, but it's getting ridiculous. The average trial time to find a conviction in Brooklyn last year was over 240 days. But there are also tales of trials such as Jeffrey McDonald's, who was covered a couple years back, whose case was active for 42 years, so long that his lawyers actually passed away and he had to get new lawyers. And he was 30 at the time when they arrested him, and they were going to try and convict him when he was in his 70s.
Now, why is this happening? Why are trials taking so long?
Well, the main reason is a serious vacancy problem in the courts. Although it has improved slightly with the Senate passing nominations in 2014, there are currently 11 vacancies in the circuit courts and 60 vacancies in the district courts. And that doesn't even include local courts. I mean, I know a local court by me, Newark, New Jersey, has backups of over 2 years in cases. So, and even if every vacancy was filled, everybody's case still couldn't be taken.
Now, it seems like you could make the argument that a longer trial would mean that your lawyers have a longer time to prepare you for it and to possibly find better arguments. What is the problem with length?
Well, there's got to be some sort of limit. Yes, it's a tactic that defendants use to try and get less charges, but there are instances where people who aren't even convicted or they're not found guilty or innocent because they pass away. I mean, in many cases, defendants are also, if they're unable to make bail, they're basically starting their sentence without even being found guilty because they're being held in prison until the court is over. I mean, the case, sorry.
Now, is there a worry that a concerted effort to make trials go swifter could maybe lead to less stringent trials and maybe even swifter convictions and maybe convictions where they shouldn't have happened? Is there any worry about that?
No, actually, there'd be actually potentially either at least the same amount or more people found rightfully innocent. I mean, quicker trials are more accurate if there's not multiple retrials, especially if there's due diligence the first times. And plus, quicker trials save time for the prosecution, jurors, and defendants. All these people have lives in other cases if you're a lawyer, and as well save a lot of money for the taxpayers.
So to put it simply, what's the fix? How do we fix this? How do we get past these really long trials?
Well, a couple things. First of all, we need to fill these judge positions. I mean, those could be approved by the Senate pretty easily at a much quicker rate. Second, we can create more courts to deal with these trials. The Judicial Conference of the United States recommended last year that Congress create 5 new circuit court seats and 68 new district court seats just to deal with these issues. And lastly, we have to restrict the amount of pointless counter lawsuits. I mean, 1 or 2 counter lawsuits is all right to make sure that the trial was done well, but if you're doing like 5, 6 counter lawsuits, that could take up a lot of time.
Josh, thank you so much. We will take a look at the latest economic numbers after the break. Don't go anywhere.
How you doing? My name's Steve. My family's lived in this neighborhood for years. Recently, things got so tight, we had to go to our local food bank for help. I lost a lot of sleep worrying about what the neighbors might think. That is until I saw them there, too. How'd I do, Steve?
A little stiff. You could have done a little better.
What? Come on. You know, I have an Academy Award.
Yeah, but not for playing me.
Play a role in ending hunger. Visit feedingamerica.org/hunger and find your local food bank.
So, I'm kind of new here, but I've noticed a trend. My human does this funny thing where she goes around and gets all my toys, and then she hides them in that basket by the door. You know, but it's always the same basket, and it's always in the same place. And then she acts so surprised when I find them, but, you know, she's putting them in the same basket. Again. It's like, hello? That's where you put it last time. You were the worst at hide and go seek.
January was a month to forget for the markets. Correspondent Tom Austin is here to talk about what caused it and what it means for 2016.
U.S. stock markets had their worst January since 2009, and it's raising concerns about the health of today's economy. Now, this rough start to 2016 with the massive global sell-off we're witnessing is mainly due to a slowing Chinese economy and falling oil prices. China experienced its lowest economic growth in 25 years, and the energy sector has been hit hard as cheap oil lowers its profits. But this all comes after a quarter of growth, albeit small. The Commerce Department says the GDP grew by 0.7% in the fourth quarter of 2015. And while that's not an indicator of great things, it still comes after many analysts predicted zero growth. And this growth was largely driven by an improving housing market, more consumer spending, and more capital circulating in non-energy sectors. Analysts are predicting more growth in 2016 too. They expect rising wages and job growth to generate more economic growth. Some analysts even predict that the Fed will raise interest rates again in the first half of 2016, a move that would reflect confidence in the economy. So while January was disappointing, we may not be in such dire straits as we were years ago, which the 5-year S&P graph shows here. Though the winner of the upcoming presidential election will surely play a big role in determining the direction the country's economy will go in.
Now, Tom, what are the 2016 candidates saying so far about these economic numbers and the economy in general?
Well, the candidates agree that there are problems with the economy. They agree, at both ends of the spectrum. Jeb Bush has said that the 6-year recovery is way slower as it compares to recoveries in years past. Ted Cruz has said the top 1% under Obama has gotten rich while the working class has gotten poor. Donald Trump doesn't see the economy as dynamic enough. He says too many jobs are going overseas. Bernie Sanders is discouraged with the way the direction the economy is going in, citing inequality as one of the major problems that we see. And Hillary Clinton, says the economy is rigged for the financial services and banking industry, what she calls the shadow economy, and over the production of real goods and services that provide more jobs.
Now, you mentioned in your report that Ted Cruz has said that he's worried that much of the wealth is going to the top 1%, which sounds a little bit like a Bernie Sanders talking point as well. So they clearly agree on the state of the economy. How do they differ on what they're proposing to combat that?
Right. So in terms of assessment, both candidates see there to be problems, but the course of action moving forward, they differ. And Democrats and Republicans in general differ. Democrats want to see banks break up. They want to see tax reform. They want to see minimum wage raised. They want to see pay equity, whereas Republicans see those measures as a little bit too costly. They want to see less regulation. They want to see lower taxes. They want union reform, and all of those types of measures, they believe, would generate more profits, create more jobs, and produce a more effective economy.
Tom Austin, thank you so much. Hillary Clinton's email scandal is back in the news. New information regarding the contents of certain emails have reshaped the conversation. And here to talk about it is Talking Points correspondent Topher Lane. Topher, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for being here.
So, why is this still in the news? This came out briefly, shortly after she announced her presidential run. Why is it back in the news again?
Well, to quote Bernie Sanders, we're sick of hearing about these damn emails, but it's actually something that's still really captivating to the people and especially news outlets. And the reason that it's come back this week is because there are emails that aren't being released now because they have a top secret or a classified designation. And earlier this week it was 22 email threads. It's gone up to 29, and 7 more were designated as top secret within the last 24 hours.
Now, could you explain what that designation means? What sort of content is in a top secret or a classified email?
So classified is the umbrella over the type of emails, in the classified form. And then top secret is the most secretive, to lack of a better word, of the emails. Top secret means, quote, grave damage. It could be a threat to grave damage to national security.
Now, Hillary Clinton is not the first Secretary of State to use a personal email address, but it seems like a big deal of this controversy is her personal email server. Could you explain a little bit about the difference between the two of those and which one is worse and all that?
Well, the address is a .gov email, and that's something that if you send an email to a .gov address, it will save automatically and be stored and archived in the U.S. government's data files. The private server and the emails that were being sent to her in her private email and her private server were being stored in the server that's actually on her own residence. It was guarded by U.S. Secret Service, and it was safe by all means, but it's a separate server, and that's something that was really unheard of among former secretaries of states, that they use .gov emails or that they maybe use their own personal, but it was still on the server in the Pentagon and around the U.S. government.
So to be blunt, just how bad is this scandal right now?
It can go both ways. Hillary is seeing that she has to go back to it, and that's not good for that she has to keep talking about it and keep returning to it and having these conversations and assuring people that it's not an issue. There's arguments saying that these emails have been upgraded to classified since they've been looked at. When she was receiving them, it wasn't an issue. And there's just a lot of skepticism among the people who are looking at all these stories and reading into them and trying to figure out what this all means. And so for her, it's tough, especially with her campaign, because there's a lot going on where people are getting they're not sure if they can trust her with this scandal having gone on for so long.
Now, in the campaign, how is this going to play? You mentioned Bernie Sanders in the first debate said, we're sick of hearing about your damn emails, but then just a few weeks ago, he said that the emails are an issue. Marco Rubio said that her handling of the emails disqualified her from the presidency. And coming off of not a great performance in the Iowa caucuses, how is this going to play in the rest of her campaign?
Well, it's interesting because this has been something that's been plaguing her for her entire campaign, and it's something that the candidates are starting to use as a talking point to try and bring her down, especially Bernie Sanders, who's her chief competition right now in the primaries. But I think that this is something that really she needs to figure out and deal with, and she's been kind of sidestepping it, I feel like. She's been kind of disregarding it, making quick arguments and not really making a big discussion about it. I think she needs to disregard and solve this problem and really face it front on and then get it resolved so that she can move forward and maybe start to let voters trust her more, and that they'll step forward and see that she's someone that isn't necessarily defined by this email scandal. And that's something that I think the candidates right now are using very well to try and bring her down. And it's working well, as we saw in the Iowa caucuses.
Topher, thank you so much. Coming up after the break, a recap of the Iowa caucuses, a look ahead to New Hampshire, and a mini history lesson. Stay with us.
If you see news happening on campus in Syracuse or across the nation, call the CitrusTV newsroom at 315-443-1177 or tweet at CitrusTV News, your campus news leader.
Staring contest!
You still got it.
I know.
Come alive with the forest. Visit discovertheforest.org to find a forest near you.
I've got a job to do today.
I've got a job to do today.
Have a good first day at work, Mom.
Your donations to Goodwill fund job training programs right in your community.
Feels good to start fresh, right?
Sure does.
And like that, you're a job creator.
There's a shelter pet who wants to meet you. Meet one today. Visit theshelterpetproject.org. Adopt.
Thank you, dear. Well, you're very supple. Just like I was at your age. Back then, I was a sex expert. Used to call me the buttered biscuit. I know about birth control, too. So you can ask me anything, baby.
Bedsider.org has birth control information and a lot more. And it's...
Have you had sex in this car yet?
The race for the presidency is heating up as the candidates shift their focus to New Hampshire. Here to tell us more about the upcoming primary and what it means to the race is Talking Points political correspondent Josh Carney. Josh, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Alex.
So last night was another Democratic town hall, the first one with the only candidates being Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders. Who did the best job last night?
I would say Hillary Clinton looked very presidential. She looked like she was forming into that role, but she also was very dodgy, while Bernie stuck to his guns and played to his base in a state where he's very comfortable. Both of them looked pretty good. Both of them looked the same as the last one. I think it's just more about getting the press out there and having another round in New Hampshire.
After the Iowa caucuses, there's always sort of an immediate downplay of the Iowa caucuses are notoriously not great for predicting the nominations. How big is New Hampshire for this primary, though?
New Hampshire is definitely on point and on the spot. The reason why primarily a lot of people think is because it is a primary as opposed to a caucus. Now, for those who are unaware of the difference, a caucus is when people actually have to meet, discuss, and in many cases flip a coin or go through some sort of process as a collective unit to decide on where the delegates go. Whereas a primary in New Hampshire is designed exactly how the presidential race is going to turn out and play out. Therefore, it's not exactly easier for them to win votes, but it's easier for people to participate, and thus they get a more accurate reading.
New Hampshire is in a couple of days. Who's in the best shape right now as far as the polls are standing?
In terms of the polls, Bernie Sanders is looking at a 31-point margin, but that's because he's from the neighboring state and he's ultimately very comfortable. While Clinton is diverting her resources elsewhere, they're both pushing pretty hard. We see Trump ahead of the polls, but Rubio is actually topping Cruz, mostly because he's made more of an effort and he's been able to strategically place a lot of his resources in different baskets, while Cruz has been very focused on Iowa. I would say it's the same classic candidates who are positioning themselves very well. It's just going to be a fight to the finish.
Shifting gears a little bit, this presidential race is on track to be the most expensive in history. There's already been a lot of money poured in. Is that translating well to actual votes, though? There was one stat I remember reading that Jeb Bush spent about $2,000 per vote he got in Iowa. How is money translating to votes in this presidential cycle?
It's not working for Jeb Bush, but it is working for candidates much like Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz has had over 200,000 volunteers working for lots of donations, and Bernie Sanders has run a complete grassroots campaign. While super PACs are definitely larger, and Hillary Clinton is certainly benefiting from that alongside with her Republican counterparts, Mr. Trump has done a self-starter campaign. So there's a lot of different variations, but when we see classical PACs overspending to try and get the right amount of votes, Jeb Bush didn't even pull more than 3,400 votes in Iowa. So clearly it's about appropriation as opposed to the actual value that these candidates are bringing in.
Now, Josh, we know that you and our executive producer, Mike Riccardi, are going to New Hampshire next week to help cover the primary. What are you going to be looking for? What are you looking for in New Hampshire next week?
Well, what we're looking for in New Hampshire is we're trying to find who is really making some dynamic moves. And that sounds pretty generic, but realistically, we know how well Bernie's going to do. We know that Trump will certainly do well in the polls, but we're looking for undercards such as Rubio and how Clinton is truly going to fare in a state that has been fair to her husband and been fair to the Clinton name, but has not necessarily been fair to Hillary. So we're going to try and find ways in which they are tackling smaller segments of the population and really going out and getting that vote.
Josh Carney, thank you so much.
Thanks, Alex.
Finally, today we have our first installment of Talking Points Looks Back, where we talk a little bit about important moments and people in history. Today I'd like to talk about our friend on the $20 bill, Andrew Jackson. An early founder of the Democratic Party, Jackson's policy record is checkered and controversial, including fighting the Bank of the United States and expelling the Cherokee Indians from Georgia to Oklahoma. However, I'd like to spend a minute on his equally colorful personality. After being elected, Jackson promised to be a man of the people. This was symbolized by a giant block of cheese that he kept in front of the White House, open to any citizens who wished to eat it, despite the obvious hygiene concerns. However, it was probably best demonstrated by his inauguration party. The party was held at the White House and was open to anyone who wished to come. Enough people came and enough whiskey punch was drank that the inside was virtually destroyed and Jackson had to escape through the back door. The crowd finally left when the liquor was moved outside. Perhaps the most interesting thing about Jackson was his physical toughness, and there are two examples of this. One happened when he was president. A man tried to assassinate him, but as luck would have it, both of his pistols misfired. He was arrested, but not before Andrew Jackson nearly beat him to death with his cane. Another happened before he was president when a man insulted his wife. Logically, Jackson challenged him to a duel. The other man got off the first shot and hit Jackson in the chest. But that didn't matter because Jackson took a minute to steady himself, then shot and killed his opponent. It's like Machiavelli wrote, "If an injury has to be done to a man, it should be so severe that his vengeance need not be feared." Or in the more blunt terms of Omar Little, "You come at the king, you best not miss." That's all the time we have for Talking Points this evening. Thank you for joining us. Be sure to check us out on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, as well as our Talking Points blog. I'm Alex Amico. Good night, Syracuse.